The morning arrived quietly, like it was unsure whether it should disturb what was about to happen. The sun was already up, spreading soft light through the thin curtains of a small room near the wedding hall. Everything inside that room had been prepared days ago. Clothes were pressed. Shoes were polished. Small gifts were arranged neatly on the table. From the outside, it looked like the start of a happy day. From the inside, it felt heavier than expected. The person at the center of this day sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. There was no panic, no tears, no excitement either. Just a strange calm mixed with a tight feeling in the chest. Everyone said this was normal. They said big days always bring nerves. They said happiness doesn't always feel loud. So the feeling was ignored, pushed aside like dust under a carpet. Outside, cars started arriving early. The sound of doors closing, people greeting each other, laughter drifting through the air. The wedding hall was already alive. Decorations were being adjusted, flowers moved slightly to look perfect. Workers rushed around, making sure nothing went wrong. It was meant to be a celebration, and it looked like one. Inside the room, a phone lay face down on the table. It had been checked many times already. No new messages. No missed calls. That silence felt louder than any noise outside. There was someone who should have called. Someone who always did, even for small reasons. But today there was nothing. The phone stayed still, like it was waiting for something to dot. Family members knocked gently and came in with smiles that tried a little too hard. They talked about timing, about guests, about how proud everyone was. Compliments were given, advice was shared, jokes were made to lighten the mood. Every word was kind, but none of them touched what was really happening inside. The mirror reflected someone who looked ready. Anyone would say this person was lucky. A good match, a stable future, respect from society. Everything that people say matters. Yet the eyes in the mirror looked distant, like they were watching someone else's life. Memories slipped in without permission. Not dramatic ones. Just small moments from the past. Late conversations that felt real. Silence that felt comfortable instead of awkward. Dreams spoken without fear of being judged. Those memories didn't belong to today's plan, so they were quickly pushed away. Today was about responsibility, not feelings. At least that's what had been repeated for months. The wedding hall filled faster as time moved on. Chairs were taken. The sound system was tested again and again. Somewhere outside, someone stood near the entrance longer than necessary. Not a guest, not staff, not sure why they were there at all. They hadn't planned to come. Their feet just brought them there, like something unseen was pulling them closer. Back in the room, final touches were made. Someone adjusted clothing. Someone fixed hair. Someone reminded that it was almost time. With each passing minute, the pressure grew, but it stayed quiet. No one noticed. No one asked the one question that mattered most. A deep breath was taken. The kind people take before stepping into something they can't easily step out of. There was no thought of running away. No dramatic escape. Just a hope that once everything started, the doubts would disappear. As the door to the room opened, the noise from the hall rushed in. Applause, music, voices blending into one loud wave. Walking forward felt like moving through water, slow and heavy. Every step echoed inside the head. Eyes from all directions watched with admiration. Smiles followed. Some people whispered kind words. Others simply stared, moved by the moment. To them, this was beautiful. To them, this was right. Somewhere near the entrance of the hall, the person waiting outside checked the time again. They told themselves they were being foolish, that they should leave, that whatever they felt was too late. Still, they didn't move. Something inside refused to let them go. Inside the hall, the ceremony began. Words about commitment, about togetherness, about forever filled the air. They sounded rehearsed, yet powerful enough to make others emotional. People nodded, some wiped tears. It was everything a wedding should be. The one standing at the center listened carefully. Each word felt heavier than the last. Not because they were wrong, but because they demanded honesty. And honesty was the one thing missing. The phone in the pocket vibrated suddenly. Just once. A small movement, barely noticeable. The heart skipped before the mind could catch up, but it wasn't the message hoped for. Just a reminder notification. Another quiet disappointment. The voice speaking at the front paused, waiting for responses that would soon be required. This was the point of no return, everyone said. The moment life officially changed, outside, the waiting person finally stepped closer to the door. They didn't know what they would do if they went in. They didn't even know if they should. All they knew was that walking away felt impossible. Inside, the air felt thinner. The light seemed brighter. The sounds felt distant, like they were coming from underwater. A thought appeared, clear and frightening at the same time. What if this wasn't fear but truth? There was no answer yet. Only a growing silence between heart and mind. The ceremony continued, moving forward like a train that wouldn't stop. And while everyone believed the story was already written, fate stood just outside the wedding hall, waiting patiently for its turn. The ceremony did not stop after the pause. It moved forward the way it always did, guided by habit and tradition. Words were spoken, responses were expected, and everyone watched closely. The person standing at the center answered when required, almost on instinct. The voice sounded steady, even though inside everything felt unbalanced. When the formal part ended, the hall filled with applause. People smiled wider, relief spreading across their faces. To them, the most important step was done. They believed the hardest part was over. No one noticed the slight delay in movement. The way the hands stayed still for a moment longer than necessary. Soon, the crowd shifted toward celebration. Music grew louder. Conversations overlapped. Plates were passed around. Laughter echoed against the walls. It was the kind of noise that usually brings joy, but now it felt like it was pressing in from all sides. Family members came closer, offering hugs and blessings. They spoke about the future, about responsibilities, about how life would now move faster. Their words were warm and well-meaning. Still, each sentence added weight instead of comfort. Somewhere between smiles and greetings, the phone was checked again. This time, there was a new message. Just one line. Simple and short. It didn't ask for anything. It didn't demand an explanation. It only said that the sender was outside and didn't know why they felt the need to be there for a second. The world narrowed to that screen. Sounds faded. Faces blurred. That one message carried more honesty than all the speeches combined. A quiet truth rose inside, slow but clear. The phone was slipped back into the pocket without a reply. Not yet. There were too many eyes, too many expectations. Leaving suddenly would turn this into a scene, and scenes were something this person had avoided all their life. The celebration continued. Photos were taken. People were guided into positions, told where to stand and how to smile. The camera flashed again and again, capturing moments that looked perfect. Each click felt like another lock closing. Between photo sessions, there was a brief moment alone near a side corridor. The noise from the hall softened there. The walls felt cooler. Breathing became easier. That was when the doubts returned stronger than before. Thoughts drifted back over the years. How this path had slowly formed without a clear decision ever being made. One step taken because it was expected. Another because it seemed practical. Feelings were delayed, postponed, explained away. There was always time later. Until suddenly, later had arrived wearing wedding clothes. Outside the hall, a waiting person sat on a low wall near the entrance. People passed by without paying attention. Some assumed they were a guest getting fresh air. Others didn't notice them at all. They checked their phone once, then decided not to look again. Whatever happened next had to happen naturally. Back inside, food was served. The smell should have been comforting, but it wasn't. Eating felt impossible. Every bite felt like pretending, so the plate stayed mostly untouched. No one questioned it. Big days make people nervous, they said. A friend leaned in and joked about how strange life becomes after marriage. The joke was light, but it landed heavily. Life becoming strange wasn't the problem. Living a lie was another message arrived. Still calm, still respectful. It said there was no pressure, no expectations. Just a feeling that if they didn't show up today, they would regret it forever. That word lingered. Forever, forever had been spoken many times that day, but this time it felt real. Forever was not just about staying. It was also about choosing. A decision didn't come all at once. It formed slowly, like dawn. Not dramatic, not loud. Just clear. A trusted family member noticed the change in expression and asked softly if everything was all right. The question was simple, but it broke something open. For the first time, the answer wasn't automatic. A nod was given instead of words. There wasn't enough courage yet to say more. The noise of the hall suddenly felt unbearable. Excuses were made. A need for air. A quick walk. Just a moment. People waved it off easily, assuming emotions were high. Walking toward the exit felt different from walking toward the stage earlier. The steps were still heavy, but now they were moving toward something unknown instead of something fixed. As the door opened, fresh air rushed in. It felt colder, sharper, real. Outside, the waiting person stood up slowly, like they had known this moment would come. For a brief second, neither spoke. They just looked at each other. No anger, no blame. Only recognition. Words finally came quietly. Questions about timing. About why now. About fear. Answers weren't perfect. They never are in real life. But they were honest. Inside the hall, music played on. People laughed. Unaware that something important was unfolding just a few steps away, the conversation outside didn't solve everything. It didn't promise happiness, but it revealed a truth that could no longer be ignored. Standing there, between noise and silence, it became clear that going back inside would mean choosing comfort over truth. The door behind them remained open, light spilling out onto the ground. And for the first time that day, the future didn't feel decided. It felt possible. The air outside the hall was different from anything felt that day. It was cooler, quieter, more alive than inside. The moment had arrived when small choices could no longer be ignored. The person who had stepped out felt each heartbeat as if it were echoing against the chest. The waiting figure was not moving, but the presence alone made the space feel complete. Words began slowly, carefully. Not rehearsed, not planned. Real words. The kind that come from years of silence and unsaid thoughts. Each word carried weight, heavier than any speech made inside the hall. Neither person raised their voice. There was no need. Every sound of the hall behind them seemed far away, placed by the sound of their own breathing and the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. Questions came naturally. Questions that had no easy answer. Questions about past decisions, missed opportunities, and fear of judgment. Answers were given honestly, with pauses, with uncertainty. No one promised the world, because real life doesn't work like that. But they spoke truthfully about what had been felt, what had been wanted, and what could not be ignored anymore. There were moments of silence, too. Sometimes words felt too fragile to carry the meaning inside. Silence, however, had a language of its own. It conveyed understanding, relief, the recognition that life could change in ways nobody could plan. Meanwhile, inside the hall, celebration continued. Guests laughed. Food was enjoyed. Music played. The people inside believed everything was going as it should. No one realized that outside life was pausing to take a breath, to consider another path. The person who had walked out felt a rush of emotions, none of which were simple. Fear, relief, confusion, and hope all tangled together. Each step toward honesty was heavy but necessary. It was not about rejecting the world inside the hall. It was about choosing oneself. Questions shifted from past regrets to possibilities. Could life take a different turn? Could happiness be found in truth rather than comfort? The waiting figure listened patiently, offering only presence, letting the words settle without pressure or judgment. Sometimes that alone was enough. Memories flowed naturally. Stories of shared moments of laughter and mistakes, of times when eyes met in unspoken understanding. It was clear that life had its way of connecting people at unexpected moments. Fate, as they understood now, was patient. It waited for honesty before it stepped forward. The conversation was not easy. Tears appeared briefly, uninvited but not shamefully. Emotions are not weaknesses, and in that moment, both recognized their humanity. Each tear was a signal of depth, of life lived fully. Even if choices had been delayed, a gentle breeze carried the sound of faint music from inside. The contrast between the hall and the open space outside could not have been greater. Inside, a world of expectations and appearances. Outside, a world of possibility and reality. Time seemed to stretch. Seconds became minutes, but neither person noticed. Their attention was on each other, on the rare opportunity to speak without masks. Life had given them this moment, and they treated it with the quiet respect it deserved. The decision did not come with drama. No shouting, no running, no sudden gestures. Instead, it arrived as a slow clarity. A choice between staying with the familiar and stepping toward the unknown. Both options had consequences, but only one carried honesty. There was laughter, too soft and tentative. Relief made its first appearance, shy but persistent. Even in confusion, they could see the beauty of facing the truth. It was messy, imperfect, but undeniably alive. The conversation turned to what next. Not with a plan, not with certainty, but with awareness. Awareness that life was not a script, that choices were not always easy, that courage often meant simple, honest steps. A pause came naturally. They looked at each other and smiled gently. Not the dramatic smiles seen in movies, but quiet smiles of recognition and understanding. It was the kind of moment that lingers, invisible to the crowd, powerful to the hearts involved. Inside the hall, people began noticing small changes. A delay in the schedule, a missing presence. Some whispered questions, but none guessed the truth. The one who had stepped outside was not fleeing. They were choosing. The waiting figure spoke finally, softly about timing and life's strange paths, about regrets and courage, about listening to the heart, even when the world pushes in another direction. Words landed like gentle rain, washing over fears and doubts. It became clear that the past could not be changed, nor could the world inside the hall be ignored. What mattered was the step taken now, a step that respected truth above comfort, honesty above obligation. As the conversation ended, there was no dramatic farewell. There was only understanding, only recognition that life would now follow a different course. It was a quiet victory, subtle and profound. The person who had stepped out felt a lightness, not because the decision was easy, but because it was honest. Fate, which had been waiting silently, had finally been acknowledged. And for the first time that day, the future felt open, not predetermined. They walked slowly back toward the hall, not to return, but to leave behind what was no longer meant to stay. Each step carried relief and courage. Each breath carried clarity. Inside, the celebration continued. Unaware of the life-changing choices made just beyond the doors. But that was how real life worked. The quiet moments, the unseen decisions, the honesty that waited for courage. Those were the moments that defined futures. The day went on, not perfect, not entirely understood, but undeniably real. And outside the hall, in the quiet between the music and the noise, fate had finally spoken. The sun had begun its slow descent when the person stayed outside the hall, breathing deeply, feeling the cool air fill the lungs. The conversation that had started moments ago lingered like a soft echo, leaving both people aware of the weight of honesty, of choices made and avoided in the past. There was no rush, no urgency. The world inside the hall seemed far away, a distant hum behind the calm of the evening air. Time stretched, but neither person noticed. Life had slowed down outside the hall, allowing them to see what had been invisible before. Each glance carried meaning. Each gesture, subtle but important, revealed the depth of shared understanding. Words had been exchanged, but even silence now spoke volumes. Sometimes, the unspoken truths were the strongest. Carrying more clarity than hours of discussion, the person who had stepped out felt relief, but it was mixed with fear. Fear of consequences, fear of judgment, fear of the unknown. And yet there was courage too. A quiet courage that only comes when someone decides to act according to their own truth, despite the risks. The waiting figure noticed every change, every tremor of hesitation and determination, and offered reassurance with nothing more than steady presence. They talked about what could have been, about dreams left behind, about opportunities never taken, about words never spoken. None of it was filled with blame or anger. It was acknowledgement, a shared understanding of human mistakes and imperfections. Life had been unfair at times, yet it had also been generous in ways that were subtle and hard to recognize until now. A gentle breeze moved the curtains of a nearby window, bringing with it the faint scent of flowers from the hall. It reminded the person of the celebrations going on inside. People were dancing, laughing, capturing moments they thought were perfect. Yet the reality outside was far more powerful than anything staged within. The quiet truth held more meaning than the applause and smiles inside. Memories kept surfacing unbidden. Moments from years past when decisions were postponed, when heart and mind had been in conflict. The weight of those choices pressed briefly, but did not overwhelm. There was acceptance now. Acceptance that life was a mix of missed chances and unexpected meetings, and that both could teach lessons if one paid attention. The waiting figure finally spoke, gently questioning if the person had ever imagined this moment, if they had ever thought that life would bring them back here. Facing an unexpected choice, standing outside a world they were supposed to step into. The question was simple, but it carried depth. It demanded reflection, not answers. They spoke of timing, the strange ways in which life orchestrates meetings and crossroads. The person listened, feeling the truth of every word. Timing, they realized, had never been in their control. All they could control was the choice they made now, and that realization brought both relief and responsibility. They moved slowly along the quiet path outside the hall, steps in rhythm with their breathing. The conversation shifted to hopes for the future. Not specific plans, not promises of certainty, but the simple acknowledgement that life could still be directed toward happiness if approached with honesty and courage. It was grounding, reassuring, a way to face the uncertainty ahead without panic. The person spoke of fear too, admitting that leaving the hall had been frightening. It had felt like stepping into nothingness at first. But the fear had been mingled with a strange anticipation, a sense that something important was waiting. The waiting figure nodded, silently affirming that fear was normal. But courage was the action that defined paths. The evening deepened, and the light began to soften, casting long shadows across the ground. Each shadow seemed to remind them of past burdens, but also that there was light still to follow. It was symbolic, though they did not speak of it. They simply walked side by side. Letting the silence fill the space between words, they recalled the simplest memories, the ones that had seemed insignificant at the time. Shared laughter in quiet corners, moments of empathy, instances where trust had been given and received. Those memories, though small, were powerful now. They reminded the person of the connection that had never fully faded. Despite years of separation and unspoken feelings, there were questions about life, about choices, about the paths that had led them here. Neither person had answers to all of them, and they didn't need to. The importance was in acknowledging the questions and facing them with honesty. That acknowledgement alone felt transformative. Occasionally, footsteps echoed from the hall as guests moved between rooms. The sound served as a reminder of the world that had been left behind. Yet each echo also reinforced the clarity of the present moment. Reality outside the hall was raw, unpolished, and completely genuine. Inside, the world was staged, rehearsed. Following expectations, they spoke about courage in ordinary life, about the subtle heroism of standing by truth even when it is uncomfortable. The person understood that courage was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, persistent, and often invisible to others. But it changed everything for the one who practiced it. As the evening moved toward night, the conversation slowed. There were no new words, only reflection. They both absorbed the importance of what had happened, understanding that the moment outside the hall was a turning point. Life would continue, but with new awareness, new clarity. There was laughter again, soft and warm, born not from jokes, but from the relief of truth spoken and recognized. No one else would witness this moment, and yet it held more weight than any public celebration ever could. It was private, personal, and deeply human. The person felt an unexpected calmness, peace that had been absent throughout the day. It was not joy, not happiness in the traditional sense, but a contentment that comes from knowing that one has acted according to one's own values. It was grounding, healing, a silent victory. The waiting figure stayed close, offering support without intrusion. It was enough to simply be there, to witness, to provide the reassurance that they were not alone in facing this decision. Sometimes presence speaks louder than words, and both understood this fully. Night finally approached, and the hall's lights began to glow softly against the darkening sky. The person could see the celebrations inside but felt no pull to return. Their world had shifted. The weight of expectations no longer dictated their steps. The clarity of choice had given them freedom. They spoke of gratitude, of the strange timing of fate, and of the courage it takes to honor oneself. The waiting figure responded with quiet smiles, nods, and occasional words that reinforced the strength of shared understanding. Neither sought closure, because they knew the moment itself was enough. The first stars appeared in the sky, small points of light against the darkness. They felt symbolic, though neither mentioned it. The night air was crisp, carrying the faint sense of the hall and the surrounding grounds. It reminded the person that the world was vast, and that choices, though difficult, could lead to paths full of possibility. Time lost its strict meaning. Minutes and hours blended. There was only the conversation, the shared reflection, and the quiet understanding that life had shifted irrevocably. They did not need to define the next step immediately. Awareness and honesty were enough for now. Eventually, they stopped walking. Standing in the quiet night, both took in the weight and beauty of the moment. The decision to step outside the hall, to speak the truth, had been transformative. It had not solved everything, but it had made the person feel alive in a way that the day's ceremonies never could. The evening ended not with fanfare or drama, but with a simple, profound acknowledgement of life as it truly was. Honesty had been embraced, courage exercised, and fate quietly recognized. And as they stood outside the hall, the night around them, they realized that the real journey had only just begun. The night had fully settled, and the hall glowed faintly in the distance, its celebrations continuing without pause. Inside, guests laughed, danced, and shared stories of joy and hope, unaware that outside, a life-altering decision had already taken place. The person who had stepped out felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and relief. Every emotion of the day had led to this point, and now there was clarity where there had only been confusion before. The waiting figure stood beside them quietly. There were no dramatic gestures, no words filled with expectation. Presence alone carried the weight of understanding, a gentle assurance that whatever path was chosen next would not be faced alone. For the first time that day, it felt possible to breathe fully, as if the air itself carried a new permission to live honestly. They spoke of what comes next, not in specific plans or promises, but in possibilities. Life, they realized, does not come neatly packaged with clear directions. There is no perfect timing, no guaranteed outcome, but there is choice, and in that choice lies the freedom to create meaning, to act with integrity, and to honor one's own truth. The person reflected on the path that had led them here. Years of following expectations, of delaying desires, of quiet compromises, all those moments had been lessons, shaping the character and resilience that made the courage of this evening possible. There was no anger, only acknowledgement. Life had given opportunities, sometimes missed, sometimes unseen, but always teaching. Silence returned for a while. Not uncomfortable silence, but the kind that allows reflection. The cool night air seemed to carry away the heavy weight of the day, replacing it with a gentle lightness. Breathing slowly, feeling the rhythm of their own heartbeat, The person understood that honesty often comes quietly without fanfare, but leaves a lasting impact. They spoke of fear. Fear had been constant throughout the day, a shadow behind every smile and every word spoken in the hall. But now, fear had transformed into awareness. Awareness of responsibility, awareness of consequences, but also awareness of strength. The courage to act, even when it is difficult, had been found in that moment outside the hall. The waiting figure shared thoughts about life's strange ways, how connections appear at unexpected times, how paths cross again when they are meant to, and how fate waits patiently, often unnoticed. It was not mystical or magical, just simple reality. People, choices, and timing often align in ways that are subtle but meaningful. Recognizing these patterns allows a deeper understanding of oneself and the world. They spoke of hope, not naive hope, not promise, but realistic hope. Hope grounded in the knowledge that life is ongoing, that every choice leads to another, and that even mistakes can guide toward clarity. The person realized that hope did not come from waiting for the perfect moment, but from embracing the truth in the present moment. Memories returned, gentle and vivid. Small interactions, laughter shared long ago, moments of comfort and understanding. Those memories had been tucked away, but tonight they felt alive, reminding the person of who they were before expectations and responsibilities had clouded the heart. They were pieces of life that had been preserved for this very moment, when recognition and honesty met again. As the conversation continued, it shifted naturally toward the future, not as a concrete plan, but as a sense of direction. What mattered now was living authentically, making decisions that reflected inner truth, and letting go of what no longer served growth or happiness. There was no need to rush, no demand to define the path in full. Awareness alone was transformative. A gentle laugh broke through the quiet, not of amusement, but of release. The tension of the day, the weight of expectation, the accumulation of years of postponed feelings lifted in a single, soft sound. It was the sound of human relief, of honesty acknowledged, of fear confronted and respected but not allowed to dominate. They walked slowly along the quiet path leading away from the hall. Each step carried intention, each breath carried clarity. The night sky above was dotted with stars, small lights in a vast darkness, symbolic perhaps, though neither spoke of it. The stars were silent witnesses, small markers of the vast possibilities that awaited. The person reflected on the reactions that might come, the judgment that might follow, the misunderstanding from those who did not see the truth behind the choices made. But it did not matter. What mattered was that the choice was authentic, made without deceit or compromise of the self. That alone was victory. They spoke softly about gratitude. Gratitude for the courage to act, for the chance to face truth, for the presence of someone who understood without judgment. Gratitude for the lessons of life, for the missed opportunities that taught resilience, and for the small moments that reminded them of who they were. Gratitude had become a quiet anchor, keeping the heart steady amidst uncertainty. As the night grew deeper, there was an understanding that life would continue, with challenges and joys intertwined. But there was also confidence that future choices would be made with clarity and honesty, that courage would guide actions, and that truth would be valued over comfort or fear. It was a profound awareness that this night, this conversation, this simple moment outside the hall, had reshaped the trajectory of a life. They paused near a small garden outside the hall, the faint scent of flowers mixing with the cool night air. It was peaceful, unremarkable to any passerby, but for them, it was transformative. It was a place where honesty had been honored, where fear had been faced, where the first step toward authentic life had been taken. A silent promise to oneself had been made, to continue forward with courage. Regardless of the unknown, the music and laughter inside the hall continued, distant but not distracting. Those inside celebrated what they believed was a joyous event. Outside, a quieter, more profound celebration was taking place, one of self-realization, courage, an acknowledgement of what truly matters in life. They spoke one final time. softly about the value of moments like these, about how life does not always announce its lessons loudly, how truth and courage often reside in quiet spaces, away from applause and recognition, how destiny, patience, and awareness come together in ways that shape not just the present but the entire future. The person understood fully that the journey ahead would not be easy. Life rarely is. There would be difficult days, questions, doubts, and moments of fear. But the foundation laid in that moment outside the hall, the decision to act honestly, to honor one's feelings, to embrace courage would serve as a guide. Each step forward could now be taken with integrity. The waiting figure stayed until the very last light from the hall began to fade. Then, without words, they parted ways for the night. Not with finality, but with understanding. Both knew that the evening had shifted the course of life. Even if the consequences had not yet fully revealed themselves, the person walked away slowly, each step a reminder of the clarity gained, the courage exercised, and the life reclaimed. The path was uncertain, as all paths are, but it was now chosen consciously, rather than followed blindly. And that awareness was powerful beyond measure. In the quiet of the night, beneath the stars, they paused once more to breathe deeply. The events of the day, the conversation, the acknowledgement of truth, all of it coalesced into a singular understanding. Life was not about perfection or appearances. It was about honesty, courage, and the choices made in alignment with one's deepest self. The distant lights of the hall dimmed as the night fully embraced the surroundings. The celebration within would continue, unaware that outside the most significant moments of the day had unfolded quietly. Moments that would shape the future, instill resilience, and define the life of the person who had finally stepped into authenticity. And as they walked into the unknown night, they felt a sense of completion and a readiness to face whatever came next. Fate had waited patiently outside the wedding hall, and now it had been met with honesty, courage, and the quiet strength that comes from truly acknowledging oneself. The days after that evening were quiet in ways that felt unfamiliar. The hall, the celebration, and the expectations were now behind. Life continued around the person, but the world felt slower, more deliberate. Every morning carried a subtle reminder of the choice made, and it was both a comfort and a challenge. They had stepped into honesty, and now it was time to live with it fully. Each day began with reflection. The night outside the hall had changed something fundamentally, though not visibly. It had not provided answers to everything, nor had it erased fear. But it had provided clarity, a clear understanding that life could only move forward if it was faced honestly. With each sunrise, that clarity grew stronger, offering a quiet courage that was steady and persistent. The first steps into ordinary life after the decision were not dramatic. There was no immediate applause, no acknowledgement from the world. There were only small moments making choices that aligned with inner truth, speaking honestly to friends and colleagues, and embracing responsibilities without denying personal feelings. Each moment carried significance because it was chosen intentionally, not because it was expected. Encounters with family were cautious at first. Some noticed a change, others did not. Questions came slowly, with concern and curiosity. The person responded with calmness, explaining little but allowing actions to speak. It was an ongoing lesson in patience and understanding. People often do not immediately see the depth of a choice. They only notice what is visible on the surface at work. In social circles and in casual meetings, the person found a renewed sense of confidence. Not arrogance or loudness, but a quiet assurance that came from living authentically. It was noticed by some, understood by others, and ignored by many. Yet it did not matter. The journey was internal. The strength gained was deeply personal. Thoughts often drifted back to that evening outside the hall. The waiting figure, the conversation, the quiet honesty, it all remained vivid. Replaying those moments brought both warmth and a sense of responsibility. Warmth for the courage exercised, and responsibility to maintain that honesty in the face of challenges yet to come. A few days later, a small meeting was arranged, not planned but naturally occurring. With someone who had been part of that unexpected moment, words flowed easily, unforced. They spoke of life, of lessons learned, of timing and chance. They acknowledged the courage it had taken to act honestly and recognized that the world often moves too fast to allow such clarity in ordinary moments. There were times of doubt too. Nights when fear resurfaced, wondering if the choice was right, if consequences would be harsh, if others would understand. But even in doubt, the foundation laid outside the hall remained steady. It reminded them that fear is natural, but it should not dictate decisions. Courage was the guiding principle, and it was now deeply embedded in the person's character. Connections with friends and trusted individuals deepened. The honesty of that moment created openings for conversation that had never existed before. People sensed authenticity, even if they did not know the full story. Relationships grew stronger, grounded in mutual respect and understanding. It became clear that truthfulness attracts its own kind of trust. Subtle, but powerful. The person also began to reflect on the idea of fate, not as something magical or predetermined, but as the moments life offers when courage meets opportunity. Fate had been waiting outside the hall, patient and silent, until honesty allowed it to speak. Understanding this made it easier to see the value of paying attention to small signals, noticing timing, and of acting with integrity. Every decision afterward carried more awareness. Small choices, like responding to messages, speaking opinions, or making personal commitments, were now guided by a conscious desire to remain true to oneself. The weight of authenticity brought a subtle discipline, but also a profound freedom. Life, once dictated by expectations and fear, now felt like a series of deliberate steps, each meaningful in its own way. Family dynamics evolved slowly. Conversations became more honest, sometimes uncomfortable, but always real. People adjusted to the change, learning that living authentically requires patience for both the person and those around them. The person learned to navigate these dynamics with empathy, understanding that everyone has their own fears and assumptions. Social gatherings were approached differently. Instead of following routines and scripts, the person engaged with intention. Words were chosen carefully, interactions were genuine, and presence was conscious. This approach, subtle but noticeable, drew people in naturally. Authenticity, it seemed, was magnetic, in ways that pretension never was. The memory of the wedding hall, once overwhelming, became a reference point. It reminded the person of the importance of listening to intuition, recognizing fear but not letting it dominate, and embracing courage, even when the outcome was uncertain. Life's lessons often arrive quietly, but their impact lasts for years. As weeks passed, the person found themselves reflecting more on what it means to live fully. Life was not about perfection or meeting others' expectations. It was about understanding the self, making conscious choices, and embracing the consequences. It was about recognizing the subtle ways in which fate provides guidance. Waiting for honesty before acting, there were small celebrations of success, personal achievements, and moments of joy. They were quieter than the wedding inside the hall, but deeper in significance. Each smile, each laugh, each fulfilled responsibility carried weight because it was authentic. Life felt richer, even in its ordinary moments, because it was fully experienced. Occasionally, the person revisited the hall not to re-enter, but to walk past it. Seeing the building from a distance was a reminder of the choice made and the courage exercised. The decorations and celebrations inside continued, unaffected by the quiet transformations outside. It was a contrast between appearances and reality, and the person appreciated the lessons learned from both. Interactions with the waiting figure, though less frequent, continued to be meaningful. Each meeting was grounded in honesty, mutual respect, and understanding. They spoke of life's lessons, of growth, and of the power of acting with integrity. These conversations reinforced the understanding that real connections are built on truth, it's not convenience. The person also began writing in a journal, capturing thoughts, reflections, and lessons. Writing became a tool for clarity, a way to process emotions, and a method to observe personal growth. Each entry reflected the ongoing journey, showing progress, challenges, and the evolving understanding of courage and honesty. Challenges arose as they always do. People questioned decisions, expectations clashed, and unforeseen events tested resolve. Yet, the foundation built outside the hall remained solid. It was a constant reminder that integrity and authenticity guide decisions more reliably than fear or societal pressure. The person noticed changes within themselves. There was less hesitation, more focus, and a deeper appreciation for the ordinary moments that compose life. Breathing, walking, speaking, and even listening were now done with awareness. Life was no longer a series of reactions. It had become a series of conscious actions. Friends and colleagues noticed subtle differences. Confidence, calmness, and a quiet decisiveness appeared. Not everyone understood the reasons, but the impact was clear. People were drawn to authenticity. Even when they did not fully grasp the story behind it, there was an ongoing reflection on the concept of time. The choice made outside the hall had altered the perception of past, present, and future. The past was no longer a source of regret, but a collection of lessons. The present was fully lived, appreciated, and acknowledged. The future, uncertain yet promising, was approached with courage and awareness. Each day carried subtle celebrations of self, completing tasks with honesty, responding truthfully to challenges, embracing responsibilities consciously, and treating relationships with genuine care became milestones. They were quieter than the public celebrations at the wedding hall, but deeply fulfilling. The person also began mentoring others, subtly guiding them toward authentic choices, sharing lessons without imposing opinions. It was a way to honor the journey, using experience to support others without expecting recognition or reward. Months passed and life settled into a rhythm. Ordinary days felt extraordinary because they were lived fully. The lessons of honesty, courage, and authenticity became internalized, shaping every action, thought, and decision. The shadow of fear remained occasionally, but it no longer dictated choices. Occasionally, late at night, the person looked up at the stars, remembering the quiet evening outside the hall. The waiting, the conversation, the courage, it all remained vivid. It had become a foundation, a point of reference, a guide through challenges and decisions. Fate had waited patiently, and now it had been acknowledged and honored. The journey was ongoing. Life, as always, would bring unexpected events, opportunities, and difficulties. But the person was prepared to face them with honesty, courage, and the awareness that the true measure of life is in the choices made in alignment with one's deepest self. In these quiet reflections, the person realized that the evening outside the wedding hall had been transformative, not because of dramatic gestures or public attention, but because it marked a commitment to living authentically. Every subsequent day, action, and decision was now guided by that commitment, forming a life that was honest, meaningful, and deeply human.